Imagine the most ordinary situation. You're walking to your car in a usually crowded parking lot, enjoying a pleasant spring day. In your mind, you're already looking forward to a relaxing Saturday. Suddenly, a stranger with a cold stare approaches, points a gun directly at your face, and orders you to get in the car if you don't want to die right here and now. What would you do? This could happen to any of us, and it actually happened to a young woman from Ontario, California. Erin Orcutt will never forget those 72 minutes of terror when, instead of a pleasant Saturday with her young son, she was kidnapped at gunpoint. Fortunately, Erin didn't allow herself to give up, and her daring escape from the kidnapper was even caught on video. But the nightmare was far from over. Holding her abductor accountable for his crime would be difficult and even dangerous. Erin Orcutt grew up and lived in Ontario, California. By the age of 25, she had divorced her husband and was raising her son, with whom she spent all her free time. After the divorce, she and her son moved into her parents' house. The house was just a half-hour drive from her work. Erin worked as a waitress at a restaurant in the Ontario Mills shopping center. Typically, she worked from Thursday evenings through late Sunday. But on April 3, 2010, there were few customers in the restaurant, and her manager offered her the chance to leave early and spend the rest of Saturday with her child. Erin was thrilled by the unexpected time off. However, she had no idea that this seemingly ordinary warm spring day would forever change her life. Erin stepped outside, and as she approached her SUV, pressed the unlock button on her key fob. One press would unlock only the driver's door, but Erin had a habit of pressing it twice, which unlocked all the doors at once. Suddenly, as if out of nowhere, a stranger appeared. He pointed a gun at her and ordered her to get into the car. Erin couldn't believe what was happening. She tried to quickly assess the situation. Usually, the shopping center parking lot was crowded, but this time, as luck would have it, there was no one around. Moreover, the man was large, and the petite woman wouldn't have stood a chance against him, even without the gun. For a moment, hope sparked in her when a second man approached and asked, "What are you doing?" He was bigger than the armed stranger and could have helped Erin, but she quickly realized that this wasn't her savior. It was the first man's accomplice. His question was asked with a half-smile on his lips and a stifled laugh. The armed man responded, "Don't worry about it," and jumped into the passenger seat. Realizing that no one would help her, Erin surrendered to the mercy of the strangers and got behind the wheel. Erin and her captor drove away from the shopping center parking lot, leaving the laughing accomplice behind. She pleaded with him to let her go and promised not to go to the police. In desperation, she offered him her car and all the money she had if he would release her. The man ignored her pleas but didn't tell her where to drive. She considered various options, seriously thinking about crashing the car or driving off the road, but she didn't have the chance. The captor demanded that she pull into the nearest parking lot. It was a fairly busy place with a warehouse, a restaurant, a liquor store, and a gas station nearby. This worked in Erin's favor because it was a popular spot for police officers who frequented the restaurant. The man wanted her to drive to the back of the warehouse, but there were gates there that could only be opened with a code, so he ordered her to find a more secluded spot. Erin parked the car in a way that kept them visible to several nearby establishments. She genuinely didn't believe the man would do anything to her because it wasn't an abandoned place and someone could walk by the car at any moment. But she didn't account for the tinted windows of her SUV. When Erin stopped, he pointed the gun at her and demanded she move to the back seat. Her heart sank as she realized what was about to happen. Erin burst into tears, but the man coldly shoved the gun into her mouth, ordered her to be quiet and take off her clothes. She was terrified but obeyed. Tears streamed down her face. He joined her in the back seat, sitting in her child's car seat, which reminded Erin of her son waiting at home and how crucial it was to make it back to him alive. The girl was shaking uncontrollably. To show he was serious, the man cocked the gun. A bullet ejected and fell onto the seat behind Erin. Considering that the barrel was just centimeters away from her head, the sight of the armed gun demonstrated to Erin the hopelessness of her situation. She realized the weapon was fully loaded and he was ready to use it. The man forced Erin onto his lap and tried to assault her, but his body didn't obey his desires. Enraged and frustrated, he took out his anger on his victim. The assailant punched Erin several times in the face and stomach. He looked at her with empty eyes and kept hitting her. Then, he forced her to lie on her stomach and tried again. But once again, he failed. The man became even more furious. He concentrated his blows on her face, his expression unchanged, as if he wanted to see how she would react to being hit. At some point, blinded by a flash, she was shocked to find that he was pointing not a gun at her, but a phone. His grin was chilling. A new level of torment came when he asked her to smile for the camera. Erin endured one humiliation after another, hoping that someone passing by might notice what was happening in the car and call the police. Unfortunately, the SUV's tinted windows made this scenario unlikely. Over the next hour, the man beat and strangled Erin, shoved his fingers into her mouth, and tried to assault her in various ways, all while taking pictures. It was later revealed that he was sending these photos to his accomplice with the caption, "Guess what I'm doing?" Between bouts of violence and beatings, he terrified Erin with threats of death. After an hour, the exhausted girl curled up in the car to protect herself from the blows. The attacker grabbed her by the throat and started to strangle her, but suddenly stopped and began to slowly look around. He looked at Erin in surprise and asked where they were and whose car it was. Erin, equally astonished, thought he was playing some psychological game with her, but she played along, telling him they were in her car and that they had driven there from the mall at his command. The man abruptly demanded that she get dressed. The poor girl thought her ordeal was finally over, but then he declared that they were going to the desert to end it all. Erin knew how to read between the lines. She understood that if she allowed herself to be taken to the desert, she would never return. This meant that her chances of survival were dwindling with each passing minute. While she was getting dressed, the man's phone rang. He answered it, not noticing as the gun slipped off the seat and fell to the floor under the passenger seat. Erin decided to act immediately, but not recklessly. She had a plan forming in her mind. Her assailant was seated on the right side where her son's car seat was installed. That door had a child lock to prevent the boy from accidentally opening it. On the passenger side, where Erin was now getting dressed, there was no such lock. So, while the rapist was carelessly chatting on the phone, Erin quietly opened the door and ran across the empty parking lot as fast as she could. She screamed as loudly as possible, not just calling for help, but trying to warn people that an armed criminal was chasing her. At that moment, Erin had no idea that a security camera was capturing every second of her daring escape. She also didn't know that the owner of a nearby liquor store had been watching her SUV the entire time. Later, he would recount that the vehicle had caught his attention, and he found it odd that the two people who arrived in it had parked behind a dumpster. Afterward, the car rocked and shook for over an hour. Just as he was about to call the police, he saw Erin stumble out of the car in a panic and start running. The man quickly rushed outside, embraced the terrified woman, and brought her into the store. Fearing that she might still be in danger, he hid her behind the counter and then called the police. Meanwhile, at the crime scene, the kidnapper and rapist was frantically trying to start the SUV, but it wouldn't cooperate. Erin's vehicle was equipped with an additional security measure, an anti-theft lock that prevented the car from starting unless the person knew how to deactivate the sensor. Of course, the assailant had no idea where the sensor was located. Realizing that he couldn't make a getaway with the car and was only wasting time, he fled the scene. When the police arrived and inspected Erin's vehicle, they discovered a series of clues left behind by the perpetrator. Among the evidence were the suspect's sunglasses, a significant amount of biological fluid from which they would later extract his DNA, and even the weapon. To their astonishment, the kidnapper had forgotten to take the gun during his hasty escape. It was still lying on the floor under the seat. What shocked the investigators even more was the name inscribed on the weapon, Orban. The presence of the owner's name on the firearm is a common practice, especially among law enforcement officers, to prevent any doubt about the weapon's ownership, particularly in situations where guns might be passed around during a shootout. This discovery led the investigators to a chilling realization: the rapist might be one of their own. The question now was it Officer Orban himself, or had his weapon been stolen? The investigation into Erin's case took a dramatic turn when Officer Anthony Orban from Westminster, a town 30 minutes away from where Erin was attacked, reported his service weapon stolen. Ironically, Orban was an officer in a unit that investigated intimate crimes, the very type of crime that had been committed against Erin. The detectives working on her case took the possibility of the perpetrator being a fellow officer very seriously. They proceeded cautiously, not rushing to arrest or make accusations. They brought Erin to a parking lot where Officer Orban was in the company of his friend, Jeffrey Jellinger, a prison guard. Erin sat safely in the back of a patrol car, and the officers with her asked if she recognized anyone in the parking lot. Her heart raced when she saw the man whose face was etched in her memory. She identified him as her rapist and recognized Jeffrey Jellinger as his accomplice. However, upon realizing that her attacker was a police officer, fear overwhelmed her again. She doubted the success of the investigation, worrying that the men might escape punishment. After identifying them, Erin was taken back to the hospital, where samples of the rapist's biological fluids were collected and her injuries were documented. Anthony Orban and Jeffrey Jellinger were arrested. During the arrest, they found the key to Erin's SUV in Jeffrey's possession. The pieces of the puzzle came together so quickly that the suspects were apprehended within a few hours. When the men were charged with attacking Erin, both Anthony and Jeffrey suddenly exhibited amnesia. They claimed to remember nothing about the events of that day and blamed their memory lapse on alcohol, saying they had drunk too much. Anthony asserted that he knew nothing about the attack, that his weapon had been stolen, and that the real perpetrator was still at large. However, no matter how hard he tried, he could not explain how this mysterious perpetrator had also gained access to his sunglasses and biological samples. Even alone in the interrogation room, he continued to stick to his version of events, wringing his hands and loudly wondering what was happening and why he had been arrested. Despite being a police officer, he undoubtedly knew that the video camera was recording his actions and words, even when no formal interrogation was taking place. But despite the initial inability of either man to recall the events of that day, one of them suddenly regained his memory when he realized during the interrogation that the police had too much evidence against him. While Anthony stuck to his far-fetched explanation, his accomplice Jeffrey was not willing to go down with the sinking ship. Assessing the amount of evidence the police had against them, he simply handed over his phone to the investigator and asked to look at the photos. On the phone, the investigator discovered shocking images of Erin, taken while she was being beaten and forced to satisfy the perpetrator's demands. The detective also found messages sent by Anthony Orban, containing disgusting details about the attack. Jeffrey was asked to describe their activities on Saturday, and he recalled that he and Orban had been drinking before they came up with the idea of finding attractive girls. Seeing Erin approach her car, they realized they had found what they were looking for. Although he claimed to have no interest in the kidnapping and assault, Jeffrey admitted that he enjoyed witnessing it thanks to his friend. The fact that both Orban and Jeffrey laughed at Erin indicates that they saw her as nothing more than a toy to be played with as they wished. Both were charged with kidnapping and assault. Unfortunately, Erin was right that achieving justice would be difficult, given that the attacker was a police officer. While Anthony awaited the start of his trial in jail, his phone conversations were recorded. He did not hesitate to make nearly direct threats to the victim, once stating that it would be much easier for him if the witness simply disappeared. Coincidentally, this was the same period when Erin began receiving threatening calls from an unknown number. Fortunately, the investigators and the prosecution decided that she needed protection. Even though the accused was one of their own, they had always been on the side of the law and the victim from the very beginning. As a result, Erin was carefully guarded in the months leading up to the trial and was only allowed to appear in the courthouse on the days of testimony and sentencing. The trial of Anthony began in the summer of 2012. The defense attorneys decided to blame everything on the antidepressants the defendant was taking. They argued that if he did assault the young woman, it was solely due to the medications he was prescribed and their interaction with alcohol. Anthony himself took the stand and described the numerous pressures he faced: financial problems, work issues, and even problems in his marriage. He mentioned that, as a Marine Corps veteran who had served in Iraq, the Persian Gulf, and Afghanistan, he was haunted by memories of his service. Anthony admitted that the growing stress was so unbearable that he considered killing his wife, his dog, and himself. Overall, his defense strategy was aimed at establishing grounds for a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. He even expressed a belief that he was possessed by demons. Anthony's wife and friends confirmed that he was not well during the attack on Erin and that he was taking antidepressants, which clouded his judgment. To cast doubt on Anthony's testimony, the prosecutor presented a copy of a journal found in his apartment, which included an article about a war veteran who was tormented by memories of service and consequently killed his wife, his dog, and himself. Although the prosecutor could not prove that Anthony was attempting to pass off someone else's experiences as his own, he planted a seed of doubt in the minds of the jury members. Was Anthony trying to attribute someone else's suffering to himself? Additionally, in exchange for a lighter sentence, Jeffrey testified against his former accomplice. His detailed account of the events painted a clearer picture of Anthony Orban's intentions that day. When he finished, it became apparent that Erin should not have survived the encounter. The jury sided with the prosecution, and in June 2012, they found Anthony guilty on 8 counts, including kidnapping and assault. Anthony's attorneys did everything they could to have him declared temporarily insane, but their efforts proved unsuccessful. Consequently, Anthony faced a prison sentence ranging from 82 years to life imprisonment plus an additional 95 years. However, upon learning that he would not be declared temporarily insane, the 33-year-old Anthony Orban took matters into his own hands. Rather than spending the rest of his days in prison, he voluntarily ended his life. He was found dead in his cell. As part of a deal with the prosecutor, his accomplice Jeffrey admitted guilt to armed assault and aiding in the deprivation of liberty. He was sentenced to 5 years and 4 months in prison. Jeffrey was released in March 2013, having served only 3 years of the recommended sentence. Incredibly, after his release, Jeffrey's mother told a reporter that he should never have been in prison at all. And no, she wasn't referring to the parking lot where Erin was kidnapped, but rather to the prison where her son supposedly had only wasted time. Clearly, this is a case where the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Anthony's death deprived Erin of the chance to confront him directly and to close this chapter of her life. Therefore, she requested permission from the judge to read her so-called victim impact statement, which she had prepared for Anthony's trial. The judge granted the request, deciding that the perpetrator should not deny her the opportunity to have the final word. In her statement, Erin addressed Anthony. Although he could not hear her, members of his family were present in the courtroom and listened to her with respect and sympathy. She spoke about how the events of that day took away something that would never return to her, her open and carefree attitude towards life. Now she suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder and constantly looks over her shoulder. Despite what had happened to her, Erin found the strength to forgive the man who had tormented her and who had planned to discard her body in the desert if she had not thwarted his plans. By forgiving Anthony, Erin emerged from the courtroom stronger and more confident in herself, ready to share her incredible survival story. She had escaped the clutches of a perpetrator who had sworn to uphold the letter of the law and had experienced firsthand what it was like to be in the hands of those who care nothing for other people's lives. After surviving such a nightmare, Erin became stronger not only for herself, but also for other victims, advocating for their rights today.